Hello, welcome CornCon. Hope everyone's having a great day. Welcome to track 2 in the first presentation. We have a lot of great speakers here on this track today. Hope everyone enjoyed John's opening talk. If you haven't had time yet, please check out the CornCon merch store and head over to the CornCon Discord channel for discussions and CTF and other contests. Today we have, first up is Travis Hartman, President at IWC Labs. He's going to give us an awesome talk on 99 jobs and finding the right one. Go ahead, Travis. Thank you so much for everything.
Awesome. Great. Good morning. I appreciate everybody that's joined this morning. I know first talk on a Saturday isn't always the most appealing thing there, but on the plus side, I'm not the person that has to talk right after lunch. So with that, go ahead and get things going here. All right. In general, this is what we're going to cover here. And as you probably saw from the concept, the question of what, are you going to be a government role, a civilian role, doing research, maybe do some hybrid version of those. So we're going to look at what some of the resources are that are available if you're out there job searching. I'm going to provide my perspective as someone who's worked with startups, large multinationals, and in different roles with government, from contract to officer within the military. And then we're going to focus a little bit more within some of the government roles and their requirements, in particular with the DoD and the Army, and answering a lot of the most common questions that I get at conferences. I frequently have people come up to me and say, hey, I know you were in the military, or you're still in the military, or if I want to get involved with the government, how would I go about that? And this brings together a lot of that background information. So like any good presenter, one of the first things I wanted to do is like, okay, I'm going to be presenting, so it's 99 ways to do something. Immediately go to Google. And maybe I can find a great presentation or a song, something I can riff off of. 99 Ways to Die I didn't think was a really good rundown, especially if you're looking at your career. You probably don't want to kill that off. 99 Ways to Leave Your Lover, that actually only listed 5. And so I ended up going, well, I don't have something. I'm going to have to come up with different memes and pull in other references as we go through there. One thing I'll also throw out, got the overlay going here. So if you do have a question, go ahead and raise your hand. I've got, just verifying here, got the chat somewhere. But anyway, if you have a question, just pipe up and I will be able to answer that. Also, I've got time at the end. I'll be able to have additional conversations, and if needed, we can also switch over to the CornCon Discord and follow on there if you've got specific things that you wanted to go through, or just more general about the job search and some of the resources that are out there. Of course, with any presentation, there's got to be a standard disclaimer, because I do have an affiliation with the Department of Defense. That's the official thing they require me to put up there. Also, no animal testing has occurred. In fact, no testing has occurred with this presentation at all. This is the first time it's being presented at a conference, and Saturday morning, lack of caffeine, you are all the test audience. So I appreciate you showing up and being able to provide that. A little background on myself. As mentioned, I'm the president of IWC Labs. We run IWC3. It was formerly known as InfoWarCon. It was started by Win Schwartau back in 1995. It's the oldest information warfare and cyber conflict conference. So we have some of the familiarity with the challenges that go on in this virtual environment, or switching to hybrid type conferences. How do we get information out there? How do we provide new research or facilitate the different discussions that are happening that don't get to happen when people aren't necessarily there in the same location? I think with most conferences, some of the best conversations or the best information sharing, they occur at after hours, or they occur in different events, not just during the presentations. The presentations provide that foundational piece, but then it's the ongoing conversations around that. So the lobby con, if you will. Then career hacking, that was actually a village that we started this year. Wasn't entirely the same group as IWC Labs, but we were part of it. I was the founder and one of the village leads, but the career hacking village, if you're not familiar with Defcon, Defcon has multiple areas referred to as villages, and they focus in on different things. I'll go into some of the things that we brought together with that in a few slides here. The sword with the lightning bolts, that's the Army cyber symbol. I am a cyber officer within the Army Reserves. And the little cyborg voodoo doll, it's a logo I've had for a while and used on different things just because it's cute and cuddly. All right, so looking a little bit more at the Career Hacking Village. The Career Hacking Village, we got started, different conferences will have various things for helping people look at their careers. The common things that were there and that we had at Defcon, we brought in resume reviewers, career advisors, mock interviews, and we scheduled over multiple days one-on-one meetings with people so they could get their resumes reviewed, they could get feedback, how to reorganize it, what information to highlight, how a hiring manager or how a recruiter might look at some of that information, and what they should be bringing forward so that they could actually make it through the different systems. In general, a lot of systems start with the automated scan that's looking for keywords. It gets to a recruiter. The recruiter does some looking at it. And if the hiring manager actually did a good description or that's a really good recruiter, then good candidates make it through, and then they end up getting into the hiring manager or hiring panel going through the interviews. Part of the reason we do the mock interviews is to give well, it's really to give practice. And we've looked at actually switching over to having some games around mock interviews. If you've ever done the Whose Slide Is It Anyway? A game at some conferences, one of the after hours events. We're also going to be start doing an event where it's really whose job is it anyway? Giving people the opportunity to practice, getting some weird questions, getting some weird job requirements. The goal being that when they go and actually have real interviews, they've had something that was weirder or it was more complex, it was more off the wall. And as a result, the candidate is going to be calmer because they've experienced something that was more stressful. And if they're calmer, they're more relaxed, they're going to perform better in the interview, and they're going to have a better likelihood of getting the job. A couple ways to reach out to the folks in the Career Hacking Village, Hacking Career, and then we have our YouTube channel there. Lots of great presentations. If you're new to the cybersecurity industry or you're looking at ways that you might be transitioning from one role to another, or maybe a slightly different skill set, one of the presentations we have on the YouTube channel, it's looking at the portability of skills from a barista to a cybersecurity expert. And awesome presentation. What it really does is it breaks down some of the skills, looks at here's the complexities they're dealing with and how that applies to a different career field, the ways that it can be explained. And regardless of really whether you're looking for a different career yourself or you're looking at that next job, I recommend taking a look at that presentation because it provides some very concrete examples of how to look at what you're doing, what your skills are, and their portability into different roles, and whether it's in the same organization or a different organization. A lot of times a hiring manager, well, it depends. The hiring manager or the technical hiring person may have an in-depth level of knowledge and be able to look at different aspects or skills and automatically make the connections for how they would work in the new role. But if you're able to explain it, just in case that hiring panel doesn't have the ability to make that connection, it makes it easier. And of course, making things easier for people to give you the job you want is always a positive. So looking at some of the candidate qualifications from the hiring perspective, in particular, I'm interested in somebody that has the skills or ability to perform a role, but really I know that skills are going to atrophy, that technology is going to change. What's the absolute best thing today is not going to be the best thing tomorrow. So how do we get somebody that's maybe has awesome skills today or decent skills, but how are they going to keep up with the changes in the technology? So I'm looking at how they're maintaining their knowledge, what they're advancing. If they've got deep knowledge or areas that they really have a big focus in, that might be of interest if that's the direction the organization is looking at going in the future, or if we're borrowing ideas from that. Any coding languages that they might have, something, whether it's a coding language or it's a vendor unique implementation. Do they deal with the Cisco rule set and structure for creating rules, or do they have a different vendor's functionality? Also, how do they speak to the different groups, or can they speak with the different groups? Leadership, lawyers, or the layman versus the practitioners. I've seen a lot of really good security practitioners, and they can't explain what they're doing to the executives or the people that are going to be approving financial decisions. Well, yes, we're doing this thing and we're protecting it for a reason, and that reason relates to the corporate risk, and here's what that actually means, or here's what it's going to mean in terms of dollar value if we don't spend this other money to protect that. Being able to explain some of that, or being able to understand, here's what these new regulations mean, and here's what the impact could be on our actual operations. The EFF organization, they provide lots of great analysis of things that are out there. And I've seen many times with the corporate lawyers, they're good at contract law, but they don't understand what's happening with the technology laws and what that might mean to the organization. So there's definitely value if a practitioner is able to help connect those dots. One of the statements I heard many years ago, and I thought was pretty awesome, it was that all programming languages are the same. Really, it's only the verbs that change. And yeah, there was some truth to that then, and I think there's some truth to it now, but that goes back to vendor-specific implementations, or the organization code is all written in one language, being able to understand that languages, because the verb does change, the structures do change slightly, but a lot of the approaches that are happening, whether you're looking at agile development or something else, that the agile development, it's not tied to a particular language, but it's tied to the process that's happening with the language. For the people that may have been around for a few years, they might remember having to deal with COBOL, and COBOL was interesting. One of the things it had was 7-dimensional arrays. I've ran into a couple people that said, they were doing okay and they tried to sketch out the 7-dimensional array. Well, you really don't want to do that, especially during the election year, because once you hit that 5th or 6th dimension, you start having the great old ones showing up, and that's not really great for the operation of your environment. So looking at conferences, how are people building their skills? Whenever people that I've talked with, or a candidate, and they say, hey, I go to these conferences, or I go to these things, or I try to watch these videos, and that's how I maintain some of my skills. A lot of conferences, they'll have different themes or different focus. Some are regional, some are in depth around a particular topic, AI, for example. Others will have different focus areas within the conference, and so kind of a different vibe. So I'm frequently interested in what conferences do candidates attend. Defcon is one that, 30,000 people went to it in 2019, 180,000 were virtually there this year. So that's a lot of folks, but are people actually going to see some of the presenters? Are they going there to network with people? Some combination of the above. In these conferences, have they presented at a conference? Have they helped present at a conference? That shows that they've got original ideas. They've got an ability to get in front of other people, share those ideas. Also, maybe they've worked at a conference. Once again, that conveys information about what's happening, their skills with networking, how well some other people, maybe some senior folks in the industry, trust this person because somebody helped bring them on board. Looking at I already talked about what they've actually learned from it and what parts they most enjoyed. All right. Okay. A lot of times things we're seeing within candidates and people in their skill progression. A lot of times the technology is changing, or the person's role is changing. Within the military, people, particularly officers, they'll get assigned to a unit or in a role, and they'll be there for 2 years. That's oftentimes the first time they were actually in that role. So over the 2 years, they go out there, they figure out all the nuances. They had some training and background to be able to go do things before they got there, figured it out, probably left with awesome skills, awesome ability to do that thing, and then they continue to expand their talent set by moving on to the next role. Well, what happens then? So we're seeing people that are changing jobs within the military, but also in the corporate world. Sometimes it's an employer change, or it's a role change within the same organization. It's not uncommon to see the employer changes, especially tied with a role change. Not every organization does great with their talent management. And so some of the most talented folks that are out there learning and they're researching and they have that ability to move forward, they're going to jump employers. They're going to bring their skills somewhere else. It gets them the ability to do something where they're not pigeonholed or just tied in because they had a starting role previously and now they're moving to a more senior role. And many times it's also tied with a leap in salary. So that makes sense. A common variant they at least used to occur in the industry, and it's fairly common. If somebody comes in, they start as a help desk, maybe they're working part-time while in college, then they move into a sysadmin type role or network admin, become a deep expert in an area, maybe moving to blue team, red team across their different functions. But over time, people are probably going to have some deep skills in a particular area, or they're going to have broad skills across multiple areas. And that goes into the generalizing specialist concept, where people have really deep skills in one area, but they've got that broader understanding. And sometimes that broader understanding going back to dealing with the executives or the lawyers. I understand all these things that are happening in cybersecurity. I understand why they're happening. I understand the possible legal aspects, the corporate risk aspects. And because of that, I can then explain what we're doing and what we need to be able to do in the future so that we remain competitive. Unfortunately, a few cybersecurity folks, or I'd say a significant number, tend to look at, we need to do all these things because that's the absolute best way to secure our network. Well, it really becomes about managing risk. The executives will often look at, well, if this happens, I'm going to have a $50,000 penalty I have to pay, and why should I spend $100,000 on it? Well, perhaps because that $100,000 is going to offset paying that penalty 3 times. And oh, by the way, the balance sheet has organizational risk as one of the things there. So being aware of those factors helps explain things, maybe get the resources that are needed. Typically, when I was looking at candidates that would come across, I ended up grouping them into 1 of 4 different areas. And those areas were people that were presently in their role. They or maybe they were previously in the role that we're hiring for, people that maybe had the potential to move up into that, and people that are probably not the fit. But each of those had a little bit different level of risk. Some of the folks, if they did the role previously, well, maybe it was 4 years ago, and what worked then is not the best example of what's going to work now. So there is that risk that they're going to move backwards, or they're going to take the organization backward, because the best things in terms of technology, implementation, and processes aren't necessarily the same. If they're in the role right now, great. I can leverage their current knowledge, but then I'm going to be looking for a person that's also maybe doing things to continue to educate themselves, bring themselves forward. People that has the potential to do the role, that may be somebody that's moving up in the organization or their skill set. There's a possibility, because they haven't done it before, that there's going to be some failures. Looking at it where I'm maybe moving in towards a DevOps type direction, well, I want to have lots of small steps, lots of small successes, so that if I do have a failure, it's just a small step backwards. For me personally, I typically look at folks that have that potential to be the role. And then I'll also touch on real quick, the bottom there is they're probably not a fit. They might be able to learn the role, but it's going to probably take quite a while for that. So if I'm looking at somebody that I might consider, it's one, I don't have a lot of candidates for that position, and it's probably a more junior position. It's the person that taken a few classes, they did a boot camp, they've got an idea for how the things work, maybe they're working some stuff in their environment, and working on their home lab, and they might be a fit for this role, but I understand I'm going to have to invest in them, and I may have to spend the first 2 weeks or a month getting them up to speed on how the organization works or how this technology is working within the organization, and be able to build them up. So with those, sometimes referred to as the Moulin Rouge test, where diamonds are the hiring manager's best friend. All right. So looking at what's happening, why are some people going towards the federal environment? There's the uncommon mix of technology. A lot of I'll say healthcare maybe has some of the same, where they've got some of the older technology that's out there, as well as some of the newer things. They have legacy systems. I've seen things within the government, back from the area, the Jinko genes and Motorola StarTACs. There's some technology that's still in use. But also the same organizations, they're dealing with massive data sets acquired globally, have AI analysis that are happening with that. Within the government, in particular DoD, you're going to have some weird network architectures. Not everything's terrestrial fiber. Maybe you're going to see that in some other R&D organizations or with researchers that are working out in the wilderness, but you end up having you got satellite or lasers, the free space optics, things called troposcatter, where you're doing your big data shots where it's reflecting off the troposphere. It's no longer the low latency, high bandwidth that you have that are happening within most corporations. If you're dealing with a global corporation where you have transatlantic cables, yeah, there's a little bit more latency that's happening in there, even though that it is high bandwidth and fairly high speed, just because you're getting the distance. And anytime you have satellite communications in an organization, that adds up to latency issues. Well, why is that important? We've seen a lot of software, and whether it's security software or networking software, other things that don't expect the delays that the additional latency causes. And that may cause failures within within those tools or within the ability to look at what's happening on the network. Another thing that the federal environment typically has, and it's a real challenge, is some of the legacy acquisition. The military had, I would say, it was a 15-year cycle where things were identified and then they're procured. Okay, great. If it's taking 6 months to procure technology, you're probably outdated by the time that you have it. So with the Army Futures Command, with different organizations, there's more of an ability to work with industry, see what's out there, and acquire it, bring things in. And I think there's more of the, rather than spending tremendous amounts of money to do maintenance on networking equipment or things that should have been retired a few years ago, maybe there's more of an ability to go ahead and acquire those things and bring them in. Have to have the mandatory picture of sharks with laser beams. The one at the bottom there, it's just a fun Twitter image, but the top one there actually was a researcher or person, DoD, but provided mounts to attach things to shark fins as supporting oceanographers in their research, and they did attach a laser beam to a shark. So I've not been able to requisition one of those. I'm hoping to get one in the next couple months because it seems really, really cool. Also, I want to touch on where there's more than two networks in one location. Got an example a little bit there on the left-hand side. So you may have multiple networks at different classification levels that are supporting people. So it's one thing, you've got one user, one computer, and one network. Well, multiply that by 2 or 5. And you've got these ones operating at different classification levels. You may have a completely open, unclassified network. You may have a network that's got some restrictions, but it's shared with international partners. So it's a variant of secret, or it's a variant of what's happening on the unclassified network. Definitely adds a layer of complexity within what's happening into a normal corporate environment. And I guess the interesting thing, the strategic backhoe that can cut the cable going into a building and damage all the networks at the same time becomes even more of a concern. But within the government, there's several different types of roles that you're going to encounter. The most common you'll hear is a GS. It's the government service role. They cover everything from entry level to senior management, everything from the Forest Service to DoD, many, many different agencies. You'll hear of an SES, Senior Executive Service. Those are the C-level executives. Those are much rarer to come across, and they do have the same authorities. And the military, often they're compared to, they got a general officer level authority and influence. Within the military, the structure is enlisted. The people that they enlist, they go through basic training, and they form the common pool of soldiers. As part of the enlisted, a subset is the non-commissioned officers, so E5s and above. And within the enlisted, it starts out, you have E1, E2, E3, E4, E5, up to E9 as people gain additional ranks. The different services have different titles for those. Also, most of the services, they have what are called warrant officers. Those are people that have very deep technical knowledge. They're not focused as much on leadership and leading organizations, although they certainly do that. But it's the deep technical knowledge within different areas. I think within cyber, we're going to see more growth in the warrant officers. In the commissioned officers are focused on leading and developing. There'll be the commanding officer, or there'll be staff officers. And certainly within the Army Cyber, there's a large number of officers that are bringing different skills from the industry out there. Within the intelligence community, there'll be the three-letter agencies. They've got some variation of what's happening within, I'd say, the GS, or how they're approaching the SES roles. And if you start looking more in that direction, you can get different information around that. So a few things I touched on here. We're dealing with different aspects of critical infrastructure. An advantage of things that you get in the government that you can't do in the corporate world is sometimes you get to do the offensive actions, or maybe the enhanced red team type capabilities that you couldn't legally do in the civilian world. So that seems pretty complex. Also, you're going to be working probably more with the defense or the national laboratories and research that's happening out there. And it's one of the fun things. Occasionally you get to jump out of airplanes or blow things up. As a cyber officer that's in command, I've got global communications networks. I also have automatic grenade launchers. So that's kind of cool for a little different to do on the weekend. If you're dealing with government organizations, typically you're going to have to get a security clearance. A security clearance, that's federal requirements. It's not state. And so as states have been going through, they've been legalizing marijuana, and another state just started looking at legalizing magic mushrooms. Those things can be disqualifying to get clearance. Most cyber-related positions are going to require a top secret clearance. It typically takes 6 months to a year and a half to get the investigation and then the adjudication, the review of all the information. As part of that investigation, they're going to be doing different checks, different background interviews, seeing is this a person that should have a position of trust and access to different systems. There is a new thing that the government is able to do, in particular DoD. It's the highly qualified expert, people getting hired in with very senior skills or very niche, in-depth skills, and being able to enhance what's happening out there. The mentor, leading, training, those type of roles that aren't available in what's typically growing through the government organizations. So they can be hired directly into these senior roles. Now, what's interesting is that there is a time limit. Typically, they're 1 to 2 year engagements. It can go out to 5 years, but a lot of times if you're bringing in that expert, they've got that deep knowledge in an area, probably don't want them for more than 2 years, because they need to keep going out and seeing new things. And as part of their career progression, they're going to want to continue to experience new things. If you keep them in an organization for 5 years, that's not going to have the development, not going to have the growth that's really needed. And ultimately it ends up hindering the organization. You get diminishing returns probably after that 2 year mark in terms of your development. So within the military, the little advertising slide they've got from the Cyber Corps, I've got information on the direct commissioning program in terms of links at the end of the presentation. So that's available if you want to take more of a look at it. But what's really happening within the direct commissioning program, they've got 6 different requirements. And looking at that, so the United States citizen, a few people have dual citizenship. So that is something that would need to get resolved. And not everybody has the 4 year degree. I think there may be some waivers that could happen if somebody is a published or a deep expert in the field, but maybe in that case, they're looking at going the highly qualified expert direction. I've talked to various people that went through this program. One was a PhD from MIT, and very impressive skills, and they're doing some awesome stuff. But most folks wouldn't consider, where's an MIT PhD going to go? Well, they're going to go into a large corporation. They're going to go into a startup. They're going to go to these things. But this person decided to go into the Army Cyber with the direct commissioning program because it provided the opportunity to go in see some things, touch some things, deal with maybe an organization that isn't fully embedded with DevOps or DevSecOps and completely fast moving, and help make those changes and help shape things for the future, all while helping do things to make their country more safer and more competitive. Well, what happens if somebody goes through the direct commissioning program? Well, if they get selected for it, they're going to go in, they're going to have about 6 weeks and then 2 weeks of training. And then there's also options if they're going in, whether they're going active duty, National Guard, or Reserve. Just to provide some background. So the active duty, that's the traditional full-time military. And the National Guard, they belong to the states. Some of the different states, whether it's in the Army side or their Air Force side, they've got, the individual states may have some very deep capabilities within cyber operations. And then the Reserve, it is another federal service. They are Army, and they're the 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year, but cyber is in high demand. I frequently see requests for people to come on orders to be able to support different things, maybe support other federal agencies. Provide an additional clarification on the National Guard folks. They're located in the states and they belong to the states. So they are not federal service members. They can be federalized, but on any given day, any week, any month, they belong to the state. And it's they're ultimately working for the governor and the leadership and the citizens of that state, versus the active duty and reserve. They ultimately report up to the commander-in-chief, the president, and they are working under federal regulations. All right. So one of the things that is, why have I stayed in, or why have I done the reserve thing? Well, being able to do that reserve career. I've seen whenever the civilian world gets, some stuff might be stagnating, or things aren't that exciting, or there's really some amazing stuff that's happening out there in the federal space. I can switch over to my military role, probably get an active duty for operational support, do a deployment, essentially becoming a full-time military for 6 months, a year, 2 years, and help really with national problems that are out there. And after a while, I may get reminded of, yeah, this is some of the bureaucracy or things that I got annoyed with dealing with this full time. And that's why I switched back to the reserve. So I can switch back to the reserve partial time type role and return to the civilian role. So there's a concern I often hear, is like, well, what happens if somebody is a reservist and they're mobilized? There's a USERA, it's a law out there. It requires, for the most part, that civilian employers hire their reservists back, or they put them back in the same role. I'm not going to go into the details around it, but the shortest version is that you're going to be protected. You're going to be able to get your old job back, and you're going to be able to have at least 6 months in your previous career once you leave the military service. I did talk a little bit about the call-ups there, where frequently we're seeing other organizations asking for support or coordination, being able to work with the different federal agencies. I've seen DHS as we look at what's happening around election security. You probably heard about different nations that are trying to tamper in the US elections. So being able to help federal agencies, I think, is a great benefit. And I certainly want to have an election that's not manipulated by foreign nations seeking to influence who our leadership is, or disrupt the American government. One of the organizations that supports us out there is the MCPA, the Military Cyber Professionals Association. And this has a link to some of their ongoing educational series that they provide. I think it's a good way to help understand what's going on in government out there. With that, you're able to see whether it's deputy secretaries, senior executives, researchers, folks from industry and government. And that happens every Tuesday at noon Eastern time. A few of the contacts, if you're wanting to take a look and maybe learn more, if you want to look at putting in an application for those, and these slides will be available later. And the reserves has the Cyber Protection Brigade, and may have some of their people that are attending today. If you're interested in looking at the direct commissioning program, there's the link, there's the email address. You can reach me at the Proton Mail email address or on Twitter. And ultimately, if you're out there, whether you're doing something with the military, with the government, if you're continuing to help the industry, if you're continuing to help other people out there, and you've been part of the CornCon family, helping make things a little bit better, you can really be a star yourself and help make things better across the industry. Help other people continue to grow their skills and make folks more capable, more competent, able to go out and reach that next level of skills. All right. So with that, I think I've got like about 2 minutes left, according to the CornCon folks.
Yeah, I can do Q&A, but I actually don't see any questions or for you yet in the Zoom. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to post them in the Q&A. And I did check the Discord channel. There's no questions there. Say hi to the man behind me, Trav.
Excellent.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you for everything, and I'm looking forward to going to IWC again. I know you guys had to postpone due to the virus, but can't wait to go to the next one.
Excellent. I appreciate it. And yeah, I think this year has actually provided a tremendous amount of opportunities for folks. Yes, COVID broke a lot of things, but it also broke a lot of the restrictions. Before, I couldn't stream every presenter from every conference. And the conferences, as they're moving to this hybrid mode or they're going to the different things, now I can get access to that. I can see the different people I wouldn't see otherwise. And yes, I've had cocktails virtually with friends on multiple different continents that maybe we would have met in the lobby at some conference, and it's now a random Thursday evening. So all great stuff. I appreciate you all taking the time. I'll check in on the Discord later. So I know I'm about to get the hook here.
No, it doesn't. Yeah, no, it's been a great thing. But thank you so much for coming to CornCon. Like I said, I hope to see you next year, and I hope to see you at IWC when you guys get that going.
Excellent. Appreciate it. All right. Thank you all.
Yeah. See you out there. All right. All right, track 2, we got about 5 minutes before our next speaker. It's going to be George Simmons. He's the president of International Critical Infrastructure Security Institute. He's going to give us a great talk on the new cyber engineer, how immersive learning shapes solution engineering at industrial facilities. See you guys in a few minutes. Thank you.